Hello and welcome to Decks Done Right TCG. Here I've got for you is another deck tech. This is a brood list that I made in light of the new cards from the new set, Dominaria. These two cards. I do apologize, a lot of the, all of them except for the lands are proxied. So I do apologize if they're a little bit hard to read. And that's also why there's no art here or there. It's because the site that I used didn't have the art, I guess. But it does have the frame and the text on it, so that helps. But anyways, let's go ahead and get right into this deck tech. Hopefully I'll get some games of this on camera, and so you guys can see it in action pretty soon. And then I'm also going to present you guys another deck tech coming up soon with my favorite card from Dominaria, which if you watch the review, you may know what that deck will entail. So anyways, we're going to start off with the new card from the set. So the theme of this deck, if you can't tell already, is Knights. And prior to these two cards being printed, I don't think that there was enough to push this deck to being better than like tier 12, you know. But these two cards, I think, single-handedly push this deck to a point where it's tier 2, maybe tier 1.5. It's pretty good, I think. I've done a little bit of goldfishing and playtesting a little bit. And I think it's actually pretty strong. And I'll get into why. So one of the reasons why this card here is another 1-drop. So we only have the 2 1-drops and then Path. But having the additional 1-drop helped this deck out significantly. There are other there's another 1-drop that's white, but it's just not as good. It's something you have to pump 4 mana into to make it even worth talking about. But this card is Dauntless Bodyguard. For 1 mana, it's a 2/1, and it says, as this creature enters the battlefield, choose another creature you control. Then you can sacrifice this card. The chosen creature gains indestructible until the end of turn. So you can save any one of your dudes by just sacking this dude. So he's good early as just a 2/1 beater, and he's good mid and late whenever he comes in. Because of the other knights in here, you gain buffs like this and this, but this one is able to protect one of your other guys in the mid-late game. So this is a really good card. Next up, we got Student of Warfare. It is a 1 mana 1/1, but it has the level up mechanic that was from the Zendikar block. And basically it says pay 1 and you can level this card up. Once you get it to 2 level up counters, then it becomes a 3/3 with first strike. And then once you get it to 7, it becomes a 4/4 with double strike. But typically what happens is you play this guy, and if you don't have another good turn 2 play, I mean, there are a lot of turn 2 cards or 2 mana spells in here, but let's just say you didn't. It's a good mana sink that you can make this now a 3/3 beater and get in there for some damage. Also, late game, you could just pump them out, when you're top decking, because there's really no card draw in this deck. So once you do get to the point where you're top decking, all your unspent mana can be used to pump him up and make him good. Next up is Knight of the White Orchid, and he's only as a 1/of. I have seen other, white weenie or similar to this type of strategy deck run more than this, But the thing about this card is it's a 2/2 for 2 with first strike. It says when it enters the battlefield, or whenever this card comes into play, if an opponent controls more lands than you, you may search your library for a plains card and put it into play. Then shuffle your library. So that sounds really good. That if you're behind on lands, you get to search out a plains and put it onto the battlefield. The problem with that is you don't want to necessarily be behind on plains. You want to be on curve. So if you don't trigger the ability, it's just a 2/2 with first strike. It's not that great. It's okay, but it's not great. So being that it's so conditional, it's a one-off. Next up, we got Knight of the Holy Nimbus. Now this card is kind of one of the all-stars in the deck. Very underrated card. It says, if Knight of the Holy Nimbus would be destroyed, regenerate it. And then it has, underneath that, it has 2 colorless, Knight of the Holy Nimbus can't be regenerated this turn. Only any opponent may play this ability. So basically, oh, and it also has flanking. I'm sorry, I didn't read that. So while this one, most of the other ones have first strike, this one doesn't have first strike. It just has flanking, which in a way is kind of like a different version of first strike. Like it's supposed to give you another advantage in combat, but flanking does some pretty nifty stuff. But the thing is if the opponent goes to wrath the board or destroy it, it doesn't get destroyed. I mean, if you path it, sure, but if you just go to bolt it or fatal push it, unless they pay the 2 mana, it doesn't die. So it's a resilient threat. It's a pretty good card. Next up is Leonin Skyhunter. I'm sorry. It's a 2 mana 2/2 that has flying. Simply just has flying. All these creatures that are in the deck and in the sideboard, except for this one, are ground beaters. There's no evasion. These guys give you the evasion, so if there's a ground stall, maybe you get one of these guys and able to attack in the air for some damage. Next up is Knights of Meadowgrain. And this card is highly underrated. It's a 2/2 for 2 with first strike and lifelink. Now, a 2/2 with first strike and lifelink doesn't sound like much, but in actual play, it's really good. When you have multiples, you can stand up to a bunch of the big creatures and block successfully while gaining life. This is a really underrated card in this style of white weenie type strategy. Next up is the whole reason to build knights. Is this beautiful card right here, the glue that keeps this deck together. It is Knight Exemplar for a 3 mana, 2 white, no colorless for a 2/2. It has first strike, and then it says other knight creatures you control get +1/+1 and are indestructible. So if you have both of them, if you have 2 of these in play because they're not legendary, if you have 2 of these in play, your guys are all of your guys are indestructible. And they buff each other, so that's 2 3/3s that are indestructible and have first strike. It's pretty good. It is the main reason why you make this deck, and yeah, not enough can be said about this card. Next up is probably the best knight that's ever been printed. This card makes you want to build around knights. This card is just a good card by itself. It is Mirran Crusader. It's also a 3 mana 2/2, double white and a colorless. It has double strike and protection from black and green. This card right here is a house in just the normal meta, right? Like one of the best decks in the meta right now is Jund, and this really puts a hurting on that deck. Sure, it can get bolted. Why not? But if this card goes unchecked and there's like a Knight Exemplar or 2 Honor the Pures, it gets out of bolt range, right? And so if unchecked, this card can single-handedly win the game. Next up is the other card from the new set. Ran as a 3 of, and we got Banalish Marshall. I hope I'm saying that right. I probably am not, but that's fine. Banalish Marshall is a 3 mana 3/3. All of these, by the way, are human knights except for this one, and this one. This one's a cat knight, this one's a Kithka knight, and that one's a Kithka knight. Yeah. So all the rest of them are the knights. Anyways, this says other creatures you control get +1/+1. So it doesn't even have to be a knight, but it just anthems your whole team. So it's like having Honor the Pure for 1 more mana and getting a 3/3 body. One of the other beautiful things about this is also because it's a knight, it gets the indestructible buff from here. So these pair really well together. They just give each other love. So very good card here. Next up is Hero of Bladehold. Now we're getting to the top end of the curve here. We got a 4 mana 3/4, 2 white and 2 colorless, and it has Battle Cry, which says whenever this creature attacks, each other attacking creature gets +1/+0 until the end of turn. So it only pumps the front end of the creature, the attacking portion, it's not a true anthem, but being that this is an aggressive deck, you're going to be swinging out a lot. Unless you're coming against big creatures, then you may go back on defense for the first strike part and have multiple blockers to deal first strike to get rid of their guys. But once you've kind of cleared up the congestion, you just try to get in there and seal the game up. But then it also says whenever Hero of Bladehold attacks, put 2 1/1 white soldier creature tokens onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. Now, even though those are not knight tokens, it gives those tokens +1/+0. So technically they're 2/1s when they come out because they're tapped and attacking. This card also busts them, and so does that card. So just because it's not a knight doesn't mean, or just because the tokens that it makes is not a knight doesn't mean that this card or the tokens don't get benefits. So this is good to have on the top of the card. Last creature card on the top of the card is Kinsbaile Cavalier, and it is a 4 mana 2/2, which doesn't sound great on paper. 4 mana 2/2s doesn't sound very good, but it says knight creatures you control have double strike. Now, there's a new card that came out in Dominaria that says creatures you control with first strike now gain double strike or something to that effect. So literally this is just a strict upgrade to that card, or technically the new card is a worse version of this card because this card came out first. But as you can see, there are cards that don't have first strike, thus they gain double strike without having to have first strike already. So this actually does have relevance in why it's played over the new card. Next up is Honor the Pure. Simple. White creatures you control get +1/+1 for 2 mana. Like this is white weenie at its purest form of just anthem up your dudes, go wide and get in there. And then just keep pumping them up. Really, one of the good reasons to run this type of deck. Next up is Path to Exile. Excuse me. Path to Exile. And playing a deck without any removal just seems like a bad idea. You got to have some way to deal with certain pesky things that you might not be able to deal with early, like an early Tarmogoyf or something. Might be a little bit too big for you to deal with early on in the game. So just path it, get rid of it. You don't need a lot of them because a lot of your guys are good in combat, but every now and again you may need to deal with something. So that's what those three are there for. And lastly, to round out the deck, is Gideon, ally of Zendikar. Now this card was a standard all-star. And in this deck, he's pretty good. So his 0 ability puts a 2/2 white knight ally onto the battlefield. So he just constantly makes 2/2 knights. And we're making a knight deck, so this guy just making dudes, helps out. Or he can +1 become a beater himself, or he makes himself, he gets an emblem the same turn that you play him down, if you really wanted to, and puts another emblem into play that anthems your whole team. So, like, there's not a bad part of this card in this deck. Like, all three of these abilities are relevant. So, to end the main portion of the deck, there's 20 planes. No sense in fanning them out. It's just basic planes. Don't need to be fancy. This is a pretty budget deck for the most part. Almost all these cards are really cheap, except for a couple of these. But on average, these are pretty cheap for the most of the deck. Next, we'll move to the sideboard. We got Brave the Elements. Now, a lot of lists do play this in the main board because it can be offensive and defensive. But I feel like the reason why a lot of people played this card is because there weren't really enough good 1-drops. And so it gave the ability to play another 1-drop in the deck. Now, don't get me wrong. It can both be offensive and defensive, given certain conditions. But I think I've relegated it to the sideboard because it's, to me, better at defensive than being offensive. And so we're just trying to prevent our stuff from dying. Next up is Pentarch Paladin, and this is a 5-mana 3/3, so it's definitely above the big cards here. But it's pretty interesting because it has flanking, which that part isn't interesting. But well, let me put it this way: flanking makes it to where if in combat, it actually is bumped up essentially. So now you're playing with a 4/4 instead of a 3/3. It's the best way to think of it. But what it says is, as Pentarch Paladin comes into play, choose a color. Then it says, double white, tap it, destroy target permanent of the chosen color. Now, this is able to deal with random things that you may not be able to deal with typically. like planeswalkers or enchantments or artifacts that are giving you trouble. Well, I'm sorry, not artifacts because it has to be a color, but enchantments or planeswalkers, this is really good at dealing with those. So good card there. Next up is probably, well, these two cards specifically are the best cards against burn. Specifically this one. I mean, this one's a good card too, Paladin en-Vec, but Fiendslayer Paladin, being that it has lifelink and it can't be targeted by red or black spells by your opponent controlling, makes it to where it can't just be bolted. It can be anger the gods away or whatever, but just straight targeted removal, it does fantastic. And it's a 2/2 first striker, so it also battles well with your against your opponent's Goblin Guide or Eidolon or whatever they may be attacking with. Outside of a Swift Spear that's pumped up, because it's typically, on average it's a 2/3. So you're not going to face it without having a buff from another source of some sort. But once you get this thing as a 3/3 first strike lifelink, I mean, this is just a house against burn. And this one also, it having straight up protection from black and red means that it can't be angered of the gods away or anything. So it actually is a little bit better in certain circumstances, but overall this is a better card because of the lifelink. Then we got, next up is Selfless Spirit, the hoser to all board wipe strategies, because it's a 2/2 for, I'm sorry, 2/1 for 2. It is not a knight, however, but it does have flying, so another evasion creature to get in there for 2. But the reason why you play this card is because you can sacrifice it, and then creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. So they go to board wipe, you strike this guy, save your board, continue beating fast. Next up is Oblivion Ring. It's basically the catch-all. This one, remember, handled enchantments and planeswalkers of a certain color. This one handles both of those plus artifacts. So those are good to come against various different problematic strategies that you may come across. Next up is Rest in Peace. And Rest in Peace is the graveyard hoser of choice in white. Like, if you're playing white and you don't care about your graveyard, this is just the best thing. There's nothing even close to it, because it comes in and it exiles the graveyard, and then anything else that comes in is removed, or would try to go into the graveyard is removed. So best graveyard hate in white by far. Next up is Rule of Law, and this is to prevent the combo player, notably kind of like Storm or what have you. It's 3 mana for enchantment. Each player can only play, or can't play more than one spell each turn. So you also prevent stuff like Bolt, Snap, Bolt, or Burn. You actually do slow down Burn a little bit with that, so they can't flurry off a bunch of burn spells. Just, it hoses a bunch of actual random different strategies, but most notably Storm. So, I do apologize if I said a lot in this particular video, but I made it kind of spur of the moment. This is, well, not the deck, but this video, rather. So this deck, I think, is going to do well. I'm going to put it on videos here soon so you can see it in some gameplay. And I'm also, like I said, brewing another deck to look forward to. Hopefully get that one on camera as well. But thank you guys for watching, and you have a good day.